Hello! No games today. I am going to be painting. Give me just a second. Need to turn some things down. Alright, how's that coming through? Everybody hear me alright? Ooh, the buzz is back though, huh? Let's see if I can't adjust for that. I am using a lapel mic right now. The model's not going to track well. Where I paint at, my camera doesn't exactly face at, so that won't work. But we get things set up here. We'll get going. Um, all right, I'm going to make some adjustments. You let me know if you stop hearing the buzz. How about now? And now? Talking, making sure people can hear my mic come through. That way, if the buzz is there, it can be heard. Ooh, I'm much quieter. That's not good. That is it for the automatic settings. I might have to go in and do some manual tweaks real quick. Oh, you don't have to apologize. I mean, can't really troubleshoot this without Are we getting any of the background music? Should just be chill vibes. Oh, okay. Let's see if fixing that fixes everything real quick. Give me just a second. How about now? You getting music yet? The buzz persists. That's not good. Getting all this set up is so complicated. I think I have it set up once and then, you know, it all just dies out. Oh, my equalizer in OBS says that music is going through, so something should be going through on that front. Yep, doing that next. Ah, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to ignore you, I promise. Absolutely. How's that? How about right there? I'm glad. Alright, I'm changing the microphone a bit. Let me know if the dB is a little better here. Any better at all? Still hearing the buzzing? For a second, something changed and it disappeared for a small bit. Okay, Well, what if I turn off some of these audio enhancements? How's that? I'm assuming you can't hear me at all right now. Was the buzzing gone? What about now? Still trying to process this buzzing. Am I closing twice? What about right now? Can you hear me at all right now? All right, and right now. How about now? Technical difficulties are the worst. All right. Well, let's see if I can't work around that a little bit. Is the buzzing still there? Fantastic. So, is the buzzing there at all? I swapped back to my old mic. So it is the lapel mic. Huh. I would use this, but unfortunately, if I say anything with the way that I'll be facing the paint, it's not going to come through. It's not going to pick up. So I swap back to the lapel mic. How's that? That's kind of what I'm wondering too, is if there's some sort of like interference. I used this for a hangout with my other painting buddies on Sunday, and they're real life friends, so as long as they can make out your words, they're polite enough to not let me know that there's problems. So this could have been persisted the whole time I was painting with them. So what I did is I changed the side the mic was on, and now I am adjusting the amplification using the receiver. Is that coming through at all? Am I still super quiet, super not coming through at all? All right, I'm going to make one more small adjustment. How's that? Is that much louder or much clearer? No buzzing, nice and good? Hooray! Okay, so I'm guessing what was happening is maybe my the Logitech was for my Yeti was messing with the sound for this, because I went in and I turned off the sound mixer for Logitech. My lapel mic isn't Logitech, so if that's what fixed it, that's what it is. I just need to remember to do that. All right, so with that out of the way, officially start. Thank you very much for helping me troubleshoot. Make sure everything is going good here. All right. Looks like everything is going fine. All 3 streaming seems to be going well. We can get started. So today I figured, since I have been messing with getting this set up, apparently not messing with it good enough, that I would paint on stream. I have a 3D printed Ceres Victoria model that I've been wanting to paint, so we're going to do pieces of that today. I'm hoping to get through the base and maybe the head today. I'm a bit of a slow painter, but this is also something that I want to look display worthy. It's not a game piece or anything, so we will be taking our time on it. We're going to start with the base, and we're going to get that primed along with the face and the back of the head, and the hair are in pieces. I like doing assembly painting for stuff like this because I feel you can get a lot cleaner detail, and as long as you take the time to memorize your color mixes and color palettes as far as for skin tone and stuff, they're easy enough to match again that you can do it in assembly like that. I do have an airbrush. Unfortunately, I don't have quite the setup to be able to hook up my compressor and everything in this small area and it be ventilated or not get all over my electronics, so I don't have my airbrush set up. However, I think that brush painting is, I don't know, I prefer brush painting over airbrush painting. I know for certain effects, airbrush is just going to be significantly better, but with time and patience and good layering, you can get pretty much anything you can do with an airbrush, you can do with a brush if you're willing to be patient. For priming, we're going to go ahead and use some brush-on primer. This is just some Vallejo primer that I keep on hand. I do batch prime with either an aerosol can or airbrush or something like that. Normally a can. But when I'm just doing small pieces like this, I prefer to use the brush-on primer. Alright. That is something that I will have to get used to. If I need to, I'll draw cheat sheets on my desk here. That way I know where the best position of frame is. So, the missus and I have had a 3D printer for a while now. We actually have a few of them. We have a filament printer that's a bamboo, and I like using filament printers for big chunky bases like this, where the detail doesn't necessarily need to be as crisp, but the material use for a filament for something like this is way less, and you don't have to worry about supports or anything like that, because they just kind of, since it's printing flat up, it prints pretty smooth, and it's a lot better use of materials. And then for detailed parts, which most minis are going to be heavily detailed, I think I do play Warhammer, and like for mini games, I know I'm not supposed to really say that I'm printing pieces for Warhammer. Of course not, I'd never do that. But for vehicles, for wargaming, I think FDM or filament printers work really well. And then for detailed minis, of course, we do have a resin printer. And the current resin printer I'm using is, I think it's a Mars 5 Ultra. I had a Saturn 4, and I really liked that printer. However, the screen on it ended up getting damaged, and getting it replaced was more of a hassle and more expensive than just buying an entire Mars 5. So the sad thing with that is there's a pretty good printing difference between the size of prints that are printable on a Mars versus how big I was used to printing on a Saturn. So that's taken some adjusting. I will say the release film for the Mars 5 is a lot more user-friendly as well. You had to really dial it in for the Saturn 4, and once you got it dialed in, it was good, but I went through so many release films getting that dialed in initially. So what we're going to do is we'll get these pieces here primed. We'll give them a few minutes to dry. And while we're doing that, we'll get some colors out. The modeler for this is a Patreon that the missus and I have been supporting for a long time, called Nom Nom Figures. And it's an interesting model. I'll show you a piece here in a second, as it really doesn't fit the story so much, but I liked the outlook anyway, and so we're gonna do it regardless. So, in the story for Hellsing Ultimate, there is a point where when Ceres is defending the manor, she loses an arm. And that gets replaced with, basically it's just blood that she hardens. And we have that effect here, which is why I printed this in clear, because I can get more of a blood effect if we have some level of transparency. However, this model does her full normal arm just covered in the blood. So I haven't quite decided on if we're going to do this part here as a skin tone and only do the blood effect around it, or if we're going to do the whole thing as if it's made out of blood. I don't have to come to that decision right away. But that's what makes this model a little unique, is because theoretically it should just be these, either a normal arm or these blood effects. Alright, I think we're gonna work on the base first. Ah, yes, thank you. The Saturn IV is the new one, isn't it? It is the Saturn III that we had. While we're letting this dry, I'm just going to get my wet palette set up. My palette will be off screen for space reasons, but I will go ahead and I'll show what paints I'm putting on the palette for what, and we'll be doing a mix of sorts of the colors and whatnot to get good gradients. I don't always use my wet palette unless I'm going to be doing real detailed painting. typically for batch painting or even just small detail painting, I will use silicone poppets, something like this. They do a good job of holding the paint and they're easy to clean up. I'm gonna go ahead and get the bangs primed as well. Hopefully by the end of the day, what we'll be doing is finishing the base and assembling the head. Oh, nice. Does that include the crossover? What's amusing about the poppets is my sister-in-law, once she found out that I use them for painting, for Christmas she'll give me like 5 to 10 of them every Christmas in a stocking or a little gift bag. I mean, they eventually get used. What I want to do is I want to reach out to our local game store, and if I can set up maybe some small kits, you know, like 1 or 2 little 3D printed figures each, and see about doing like a youth mini painting night where we can have some kids come in and get their first taste of mini painting. I think that'd be fun to do. If I were to arrange that, I would set people up with a little poppet as well, just because it would be easy to replicate at home. For the longest time, I avoided like wargaming as a hobby. It always held this it's too expensive to ever get started kind of atmosphere. And that is true when you look at it from the sense of, we'll use Warhammer as an example, of going from 0 to a 2,000 point army to put on the table. There is a lot of money and whatnot that goes into that. But when you break it down in that the hobby time is a huge part of the experience itself. So you buy a kit, you assemble the kit, you prime it, and you paint it. Unless you rush through all that stuff and you just don't care, that step takes long enough that by the time you're done with that kit and you're ready to move on to your next kit, it's also honestly significantly cheaper than just, say, playing like Magic the Gathering, which is what I was doing when I was younger. I've played Magic since middle school. I'm an old man, so that's a long time. And it's really easy to be like, oh, Magic is just so cheap, 'cause, you know, a pack of cards. I mean, back when I first got started, a pack of cards was like $3.50. And you don't really count that you're going to be spending that $3.50 so many times that the cost to keep up with, say, standard, or even to keep up with a more expensive league like modern or God forbid, Legacy is going to be so much more expensive than getting into Wargaming. And Warhammer, which is the one that most everybody knows, is the most expensive war game. There are so many war games that you can get into the hobby that are just as fun to play on the tabletop that are significantly cheaper to get into. I'm going to put my hand here that way camera doesn't lose focus or anything. We are just waiting for the primer to dry. I want to give it a good time to dry. I mean, the last thing you want to do is get a light color on and ended up bleeding into the primer and mixing everything up. You're just gonna have to paint over that anyway, so it's good to just let it dry all the way. Doesn't take too long, just a few minutes. Also give me time to finish my coffee while it's still somewhat lukewarm instead of, cold desk coffee. At that point, you're just drinking it for its medicinal purposes. They're rerunning Chisa again? Isn't this her 4th rerun? Oh, right on. Well, you passed on the last one, right? Yeah. So I am terrible at remembering names. The glacial samurai chick I did get, she was really fun to play in her trial, so I pulled and got her. And then before that, the last champion I got was the Spectro, engineer doctor guy. I really liked his aesthetics. Unfortunately, I'm not far enough through the story that I can gear these. Yeah, Luke. I'm not far enough into the story that I can gear these people up, but I do have them. I don't pull on very many. I am, for the most part, free-to-play player. I've purchased the, season pass thing you get for reaching, level 60. I forget it was, the wave pass or whatever. I think twice. I'm of the mindset that it is okay if you, especially coming from our background of WoW and Final Fantasy, that $15 a month for a game that you're actively playing is not exactly a ton to ask for, especially with something like WoW that has no upfront cost to begin with. But I only spend it when I know I'm getting my enjoyment out of it, and the Pioneer broadcast, yeah, that's right. With it having levels, if I get it high enough to where I get all the rewards, then I clearly played it enough that month that I feel I got my enjoyment out of it. Primary games, I still play a lot of 14 when story and stuff, or if I get an itch, you'll hit it everywhere, but every game is competing with Path of Exile. Path of Exile is my comfort, wrap yourself in a warm blanket and disappear for hours on end game. That's Path of Exile for me. I have thousands and thousands of hours in that game. Between the game itself or program for putting together builds and just doing math work called Path of Building, it's a problem. I have spent my fair share on Path of Exile cosmetics as well, so Grinding Gear Games is definitely getting their cut of flesh from me. With that said, I think they deserve it. They are one of the few companies, few game developers out there that I think do their best to do right by their community at just about every decision they make. And there are a few companies like that. I think Grinding Gear Games is probably what I would consider the king of that. But Digital Extremes, they're the people who make Warframe. They're up there too. They do pretty good by their community as well. Alright. Got a little bit of pooling in this area here. As soon as that dries up, we'll be good to go. So since we're getting pretty close, I'm going to get my paints going. We'll set that up there. That way I can clearly show paints. This strikes me as like a cratered area. So we're going to do dirt and then stone. And then with these little checks here, I might do those as shells because that's what they look like. So for our base layers, and we'll be building these up for the dirt, I have my fair share of Army Painter War Paints Fanatic. Their Fanatic line, I do have some other paints. I have some Vallejo and I have some Games Workshop or Citadel paints. I prefer the War Paints Fanatic. I think they are the best blend of paints of what I tried. I know a lot of people will say like AK's new line is pretty good. I don't have the money to just go out and buy a whole new set of paints though, so I haven't tried that out. And then for our initial base layer for the stone, we're going to start with a deep gray and then we'll build up from there. One of the things that you have to learn when you start painting, and all of the better YouTube tutorial channels will tell you that you have to trust the process. When you initially start, especially when you're doing your base coats, it's going to look really flat and it's going to look really not okay, kind of ugly, but you have to push through that and understand that for every layer you add on, that's going to change and change and change, and eventually they'll just become like a tipping point where you're going from a layer that you think that this looks terrible, and then one more layer later and everything just kind of falls into place. So trusting the process is very important. I do think it's fair to say that I have more paints now than you have yarn. That's probably pretty accurate. Well, for you, yarn hobbies come in waves. You're just not in a wave right now. And typically they would come around holidays, but the last few holidays we've, instead of doing yarn crafts or anything like that, we've done the 3D printer. So for brushes, I use a very, very cheap sable. I do have a bunch of synthetics, but I mean, these sable brushes are, in my opinion, they're cheap, but they hold their point better than the synthetics do. We're gonna start with a 2 for base coating, which is plenty good, and then we'll work our way to smaller and smaller points as we need them. All I'm doing now is establishing some base color in between each of the stones. We'll come in with our gray and make it look like the top layer was rock and it got busted out, and then below that was dirt. Now, there are definitely people out there that are on a whole other level when it comes to painting. But I feel that for a lot of, especially wargame painters, one of the biggest things that they could take away from making their minis look significantly better, and you're always going to be your own worst critic, but it's jumps in color. If you don't need 1,000 shades on something that's going to be tabletop ready, but if you were to do, like, say 3 color steps, and the step difference between your first stage and your third stage is quite the jump on the table, and from a distance that's going to look much better. You're going to be able to notice the contrast in those colors, and that's going to give you a lot more visual punch than trying to drive yourself crazy by doing, you know, super in-depth, detailed, nice color transitions. And Which all that is good, and if you have fun painting, which, you know, I do this more for myself than I do anything. I don't make any money off this. But if you're just looking for something that gets the job done on the table, that is definitely what's going to do the most work for the least amount of time, is just those drastic color jumps. Something like this isn't for a game, this is for, I'm going to display it. We will be putting some time and getting nice smooth, nice even transitions, especially on focal spots. Some good blends. All those painting buzzwords that you hear in all those fancy videos, you know. I think one of the things that really stops a lot of people, and I understand it because it's definitely stopped me for a lot of things, streaming being one of them, is a lot of people will compare themselves to someone that's on a professional level or an experienced level, as that's where they need to be to start, and then it discourages them from ever taking that first step. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, it's just human nature into comparing yourself, and especially if you respect the way someone has done something, you feel that if you don't meet that level of production or quality or skill, that you're failing your own expectations. But one thing to keep in mind is, you know, I believe Jake the Dog said it back best, that sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at something. To me, the worst thing that you could do is talk yourself out of trying. Because the moment that you've done that, you'll never know if you'll never have the opportunity to meet those expectations if you don't give yourself a chance. I also feel that there are a lot of people out there that if they don't try, it's also something that they're doing to kind of save their own internal ego. Because if you don't give yourself a chance to ever succeed or fail, you can keep this mental image of yourself of well, if I did try it, I would just succeed. There would be no struggle. And that lets you kind of hold on to this version of yourself that may not actually be accurate. I find that a lot of people that do that, though, are also the people that are the harshest critics of someone else. Given that the style of this character is anime, it's Sarah's Victoria after all, I think we will be going with non-metallic for our metals. So I will have to come up with a non-metallic brass look for these shells in here. I don't think I've ever done brass. I think non-metallic metal is one of those effects that a lot of people hold in too high regard. I think it's just like with fashion. In the mini painting world, there are trends that kind of come and go with styles, and you know, bell bottoms are ugly now, but in 10 years they'll be good again. And I think non-metallic metal is one of those things where, I mean, like any other artistic technique, it definitely has its place. But because it was such in the spotlight recently with, you know, different awards and different people, they will shed on people using metallic paints. And metallic paints, just like anything else, it's got its style and it's got its point. And it's definitely a lot easier to use natural light to, you know, define your metal using something reflective like a metallic paint than it is non-metallic. That's 100% sure. But it also is a completely different style. I mean, I don't think that you could really get that nice, crisp, grimdark look that you see in like a lot of the classic Warhammer mini pictures or just classic mini pictures doing non-metallic metal, because it's going to bring a different style to the mini. It's going to bring more of a comic book style or more of an exaggerated, you know, angle, as where using metallic paint, that's going to read metallic from nearly any angle that you look at it from. And so it always weirds me out when you have people that are like, oh, if it's not, you know, you did your metals this way, or you did your lighting this way, you didn't use this kind of shading or this kind of effect. And what you do to get your effects or what you do to get to your end piece should be up to the artist, really. We're gonna give that a second to dry. Let's see. For brass, if I do I'm gonna call it baby shit yellow base and then step it up maybe through oranges. I think, excuse me, I think another mistake that a lot of new painters make is they think that a good painter has to use the smallest paintbrush, and it's just like any other set of tools. I mean, you're not going to use the smallest screwdriver to turn, a bolt on a cart or something like that, and it's, got a half-inch head. So you have to remember that using the brush for the job, you're going to want to use a smaller brush for finer detail work or for thinner, sharper lines maybe. But a thicker brush, I always base coat with a 2. A thicker brush is going to do a much better job for just getting paint in a large area all at once. For picking up these shells though, I'm going to step down to a 1. looks like a shell too. You can pick that out. If it's not, we're gonna make it look like one. Thank you. This is just the first step, so hopefully it's a good sign for things to come. One of the things that I'm going to struggle doing on camera, because again, aforementioned old man, I am blind, is when we get to the face, doing the skin should be pretty easy to do on camera because that's just blending, and blending is more about getting your colors smooth, and it's actually more about motion than it is anything. But when it comes to drawing the eyes and getting the eye detail in for whatnot, I'm blind, and so I normally use a magnifying glass for that. I do have a jeweler's headset that I can throw on, but doing that and keeping it in camera is gonna be a challenge. What it may end up doing for that, as silly as it is when it comes time to that, if I just can't get it right, I'll pull it off camera, and I don't know, maybe I'll slide in the graphic from Sophie's final attack from Final Fantasy VIII, where it's just a field of flowers and you come back and the monster's dead. Only you'll come back and the eyes will be done. One of the things that I enjoy doing, and again, this is another one of those art taboos, is a lot of people will use, I'm going to go ahead and use a strong tone wash, but a lot of people, because of, you know, slap it on and done styles that a lot of people do washes, they'll just wash the whole thing of it. And that's perfectly fine, to be honest. It gives you a little more color depth if you're in a hurry. But wash itself isn't inherently evil. We're going to use it here in a controlled manner to get into recesses and in between the different layers of the rocks and whatnot to add depth to this for shadows. And when we go back through for our highlights and our blends later, we'll be able to do some controlling of those shadows, but initially we're going to get just a little bit of wash, and we're actually going to wash out our wash to get into those shadows and get some of the line detail back in the small parts of the layers here. With filament prints, you do have to be careful. You don't want to necessarily slap wash everywhere, because even on a good filament printer, there are going to be layer lines. And if you wash the whole thing top to bottom, those layer lines are going to show real bad. But if you come in and you do some controlled placements of the wash, it'll flow into the recesses, because that's what wash is good at. and you'll be able to get some nice shadow and some nice color depth. Another thing to keep in mind on this is it's a base. Our Ceres is going to stand up here, and so a lot of the detail that you're going to see down here isn't going to be visible unless you take a discerning eye to it, which I want it to be good enough to where when you take a discerning eye to it, you can see all those details, which is why we're even bothering with doing so much work on the base. All right, we're going to give that a second to dry and kind of settle into the recesses the way that wash is going to do. And then we'll start with our next set of highlights. I'll have to figure something out for the model. I know it's probably pretty rigid right now. I mean, the mouth will be somewhat synced because it syncs to the mic, but standing there at attention probably looks very, very unnatural, even for a VTube avatar. Maybe I have to go into Vignon and make some looping animations for painting. That might be the best way to do that. We're going to start by doing our first upscale in color on the stone. We're going to go ahead and use some ash gray, and we'll blend it with the deep gray to get our first transition. No, it's okay. I've been doing my best to look at chat. I just noticed the music stopped too. I've been sitting here in silence the whole time. Give me a second. I'll get that started up again. Last thing I want is to be alone with my thoughts. People or bots advertising for that specific site have been really aggressive lately. Yeah, that might not actually be a bad idea. We'll see if the app that I use for multi-chat, I don't really get much chatters on the other platforms. However, if I do, I don't want to ignore them. But if that could be put onto the Kindle, that would be nice. Thankfully, it's not too much of a hassle the way I have it set up now. I just have to turn my head towards my computer desk to see chat. One of the things to keep in mind when you're building up your layers is you can always go back over and correct something in order to make it lighter, but it's much harder, or to make it darker, but it's much harder to correct something light when you mess it up. So I find that for me, and I think it's pretty much true for anybody, that building up in color is just so much easier than building down. I can come back in later and try to make things darker, but one slip of that, and in an area where you needed it to be lighter, you're gonna have to build up all your layers over again. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because, you know, it's just layers of paint. If you mess up, you can always go back over it. And that's true even with expensive minis or an expensive model. Nothing is permanent. You know, if you take the time to reset the model, you can always start over. Alright. Now, to step up the shells, I'm going to do a mix of a light orange with that kind of ugly yellow to start with. And we'll see where we go from there. I've not done non-metallic bullets before, so this will be an experiment. It's not looking too bad. Now we're going to come back in with a much lighter gray. And we're going to get the highest point of our gray done. That is awesome. I wish I could like keycaps. Like, they're such a neat like fandom concept, but I think they would just drive me up a wall to have on my keyboard. I think that if you were to do them, like, you would have to limit them to maybe like media keys. I wonder if they'd fit on a Stream Deck. Because that would also be a fun place for them too. That's true. That is true. I mean, to my understanding, a Stream Deck is just a series of button presses through a USB device that you can hotkey. So there's nothing saying that you couldn't buy like an external 10 key and then replace the 10 keys with keycaps and set that up to be a Stream Deck. Have you shared your latest drawing with anybody yet? The one that you finished with the Gamer Subs Cup? Ah. I bet you Clariel would like it as well. I mean, I bet you anybody who saw it would like it, and if they didn't, they're going to have to answer to me. But genuinely, I think Clariel would like it too. I think a lot of people would like it. I like that you found all of your old sketchbooks and it's inspired you to do more art. out of frame again. I am so sorry, guys. I am trying to get better at that. Now we're going to come in with some of that exact orange instead of a mixed version of it. And we're going to do the next level on the shells. This one's going to be only at the higher points. For this, it won't be our final highlight. We'll go one higher for that nice gleaming point for it being metal. Alright. I think what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this gray and I'm going to mix it into my brown to give me a small highlight color that I can use in the dirt. I don't need a lot for that, but just a little bit of a highlight in the dirt I think will do us good. Nothing too crazy, just keeps it from looking flat. Again, with how Ceres will sit on this, you probably won't notice these unless you're up close to it. But I want that to be the case to where if you are up close to it, you do notice the little details. Since this will be a display piece and probably something that I put in my own cabinet, when if it was a gift, I would probably go even further than this, but this one's for me. The last big display piece that I painted was Rose from Legend of Dragoon. I did that for Valentine's Day. You know, you're supposed to give your Valentine's flowers, so I gave my Valentine a dozen roses. Just one of them happens to be an action figure. I think she turned out good too. I did a little bit of experimenting on her, trying to make a almost like purplish steel color. And for how she came out, I think it worked out pretty well. Alright, and finally, for the highest point of the metal and the reflection for these shells, we're going to use a little bit of ice yellow. And we're just going to go in and we're going to give them a light hot spot on each of them. Just like that. So now, hold it up and get a little more of a zoomed in look. Alright, that's going to do it for the base. We have a nice completed base. I'm going to go ahead and hold it back up to the camera just so I can get an idea of where close-up is. Looks like close-up's going to be right about there, huh? Okay. So, Next, we're going to start on her face. And to do that, I'm going to put away the colors that I used for the base, and then we'll get out some skin tones. Ceres is very pasty, especially once she becomes a vampire, so we're going to go with a lighter set of tones. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do her base as the lightest peach that I have. And then we'll do her blends by blending that with maybe some pearl sand. And then maybe go up from there. Actually, maybe I'll start at more of a red skin base and build up from there. We'll use a ruby peach as our darkest color, and we'll build up from there. The face is a focal point of a model, so this is where you are going to want to spend a huge portion of your time getting the detail right. I am going to need some true white, because we are going to have to do her eyes. And the way I'll probably do those is I'll sketch them and then I'll fill them. And then I'll dot them. Okay, so we're going to start by base coating in that ruby peach tone, which is this here. It's ruby skin. Oh, sorry about that. Give me 1 second, guys. Right. Messed up my whole frame now. That is the downfall of using your real phone as part of your set. It's gonna take me a second to get everything readjusted back. Give me just a second, guys. I am sorry. I know it's not quite the same frame. How's that though? Does that look okay? Awesome. Honestly, if I can track down an old phone, I might just swap to it permanently for camera. I'm sure if we looked, I could find an older phone with a camera good enough to do this. Of course, we do a pretty good job of recycling our older phones for family and children. Yeah, that might not be a bad idea. That'd probably also be the cheaper method too. Just pick up a second webcam. A little too watery. No, I've still got water. Thank you, though. Sorry about that. dog heard Brandywine's going upstairs and assumed it was an invader. Let's let that layer dry. That first bit of layer was the wild. Let the paint get a little too watery, and so it smeared more than spread. And that's not a good thing, but it's easy enough to correct. as we build up layers on her face, the color will start looking smoother and smoother, and eventually you'll get something where you don't necessarily see your paint lines. We are getting a little bit of tearing though. That first layer really did us in with how thin it was. With how thin the paint on that first layer was, we are getting a little bit of color tearing. We're going to let that dry completely before we add another layer. We're also going to change out our paint water. All right, let's go back through here now. There we go. Much better. Alright. I want to get under her neck a nice base coat as well. With where this sits, it would be unseen, but I would know that it's not painted right. Finally getting yourself a cold cream soda, Dr. Pepper? I know they weren't cold last night. Welcome back. Alright, so what we're going to do now is, because for the style, the whites of her eyes need to be white. We're going to paint those in now. That way we can go around as we need and touch them up. If we get any overage outside of her sockets. So I'm going to do my best to do this while in frame. This isn't even on the hard parts of the eyes. But doing it that way means that we can go back through. And she's going to have black lined eyes. And so we can just focus on the outside of the eyes as opposed to trying to do everything around the eyes and then keep the white from spreading in. we're going to load up our brush with the next part of the skin color, which is going to be a much paler jump. Just giving that a second to dry. I don't want any more paint tearing. We've already had some tearing on our cheek, and I don't want to exacerbate that. Should be good now. All right. We're going to swap down to a much finer brush so I can do the black liner for her eyes. So I'm not going to go to my finest brush, which I think the finest I have is a 5, what would it be, centuple 0? But this is a 000. This is typically the finest that I'll go, because after this, there's just not a whole lot of paint on the brush to get anything done. See, this is what I was worried about. I typically do work like this with a magnifying glass. We'll make it work. That looks awful, but I think I can clean it up. Come in with a bit of our skin tone again. There we go. I cleaned up the eyes a lot better. Let's see if we can't. It's not quite perfect. The light probably isn't. There we go. Get an autofocus on that. And we can go back to using a larger brush for blending. And we can continue blending her skin around her eyes. Alright. You need an autofocus there. There we go. So we actually still have a little bit of that orange on our palette from doing the shells, and I'm going to use that as the base for her eyebrows, because she is a blonde, but I think that the orange would work well as the base for her eyebrows. We're going to go ahead and sketch out her irises next. And I'm want to start with a dark basilisk red for the sketching, and then we'll lighten it up and we'll add some details to her eyes as we go, but that is what I'm going to use to start with, I think. No. It's definitely going to have to be adjusted. That looks awful. We're gonna let that dry, and then we'll come back in with a little bit of white, and we'll clean up around it. Right now, it looks terrible. I don't mind faces, it's eyes. Eyes are really hard because you've got to get so many different colors so precisely right without them bleeding into anything else in such a small space. There we go. All right, so now we've got that sketched out a lot better. I can add details from there. I'm gonna do a big step up for inside the eyes. We're gonna go from a burgundy to a really bright, vivid red to get the center of her eyes, and I may leave them at that. I may not add pupils. Depending on how this comes out, I may decide that the irises with the iris highlights are where I want to leave this. I apologize. I know I'm pulling that out of frame. Again, this is something that I would normally be doing with a magnifying glass. I think we can get that to work, though. I'm going to add some color back to her lips. The same thing to get the very insides of her ear. All right. I think we're going to stop with that, and then I'm going to assemble or paint her hair so we can assemble her head, and I can see where my shadows and stuff are going to need to fall. I do like the idea of using that orange as the base of her hair. We're going to start with her bangs, since that's going to be what's attached to the front here. Go ahead and set that up there for now. Let's go ahead and let that dry. So we are going to go from this orange straight to ice yellow. But I'm going to do a trick that I've done with other hair in the past, where we're going to do our highlights in a much bigger, broader area than we normally would. And then we're going to wash the whole thing in a yellow speed paint. And then once that sets, we'll go back through and add our highest highlights again. I find that because with hair, it layers so much that there's going to be so much color variety that you want to, accentuate the strands and whatnot. I find that if you do really, really rough highlights and then use a speed paint and then go back over that, you get that nice like thread look. Well, not really thread, but strands look to hair that works out really well. With these first highlights, we're just going to etch them on really rough. What we're going for is just some separation of color on the higher points right away. Again, we're not looking for anything super detailed on this step. We just want those rough highlights etched out. So when we go over it with the speed paint, we get a bunch of different values of the yellow. We're going to do the same thing with this part of the hair as well. I apologize, my hand's probably blocking most of this. I'll try to do a better job. All right, now that we got a bunch of different values, we're going to let that dry. And if I remember right, Ceres is more of a strawberry blonde than a true blonde. So the speed paint we're going to use is going to be 1 drop Ancient Honey with 1 drop Zealot Yellow. Zealot Yellow is a orange-red yellow, and so it'll bring that strawberry in. And again, if we don't like this, we can always start over, but I think this is going to work out really well. And then also for this, even though I'm using a speed paint, I want to thin it out. But when you thin out speed paint, you don't want to use just water. I find that if you use just water, you start getting tearing. So what I use is I have a watered down medium that is just matte medium, watered down 3:1 with water. I find that this lets the pigment spread more fluid without getting that tear look that you get when you water down speed paints. Alright, so let's see. This, we don't need to be fancy, we can just cover the whole thing. I'm doing that off camera, it just dawned on me. Hi, I'm sorry. Now, with the way speed paint flows into crevices and does its job as a speed paint, we'll be able to get our shadows, which will match our hair tone right away, while also getting our highlights for our mid-tone done. And then we can go back through with some of our ice yellow on just the tips and get a much more precise highlight for our very high highs. We're going to go ahead and let that dry. But as you can see, all those rough highlights just become nice and proper tones of the hair color that we were going for to begin with. And with that Zealot Yellow, we're getting that little bit of red, if you can see in the dark there, that red, without it reading as like red hair. One thing you want to make sure with your speed paints is on your tips. If you start seeing any pooling, just go ahead and take a clean brush and pick it up, and it'll take it right off without messing up the effect. So we're going to let that dry, and it's a speed paint, so we're going to give it a little more time than normal to dry, just an extra minute or two. That way when we go back over it for our next highlight layer, we don't run the risk of it tearing. I do have 2.0 speed paints, which are much, much less prone to tearing than the 1.0 were. but if you're not careful, you will still get that tearing. I don't think I'll go as high as Ice Yellow for my final highlight. I think I will do a blend of the orange that we used as a base layer and the Ice Yellow. Because I think Ice Yellow would be just a bit too sharp by itself as a final highlight for this. Yeah, there we go. All right. Now we want to make sure our brush is doing nice clean strokes. And for this, we're just going to come in and we're going to pick out the highest points of hair. Now, we do have some highlights that we can follow thanks to marking those rough highlights before. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're just going to grab like the last 20% of those highlights. And we're going to go over them with this mix of the yellow here. That way we get a nice vivid sheen to the hair. We're going to do the same over here. Ah, I noticed the music quit again. I apologize. All right. So, we've got our three main pieces of the head. And we're going to let that hair dry because I've got to handle it and I don't want paint to rub off on my fingers. And once that dries, we're going to assemble the head and we'll see where we are from there. first saw it. And we will likely have to do a little bit of cleanup. Did dry fit this before we started? So I know it all fits together. Did our layers of paint actually add enough to this that it doesn't slide in anymore? Okay, there we go. So now we're going to go ahead and get this glued on. And as you can see, we've got a little bit of black that will be exposed, but we'll go ahead and paint that to match. go ahead and let that dry for the glue, let that set. With all of our colors still on the palette, going back through and touching up those areas will not be hard to do at all. But until that super glue dries, I don't want to run the risk of my brush touching super glue, because nothing will kill a brush faster than super glue. All right. And this is why we go ahead and trust the process. I don't know if that's coming through okay, but that came together pretty well. I'll be sure to take glam shots in my photo box once she's all finished. But I agree. I think she came out fantastic. I think my favorite part is the spot on the left eye, right eye, that I messed up on is covered by hair, so you can't see it. So, what we got done today was the base and the face. Let me see if I can't set up a background real quick, and I will move the camera to give you a good look of each. I know I have photo backgrounds for just this. I thought I moved them to my drawer. I will be right back. I'm going to step away to grab that photo background. I mean, honestly, you guys are coming with me because I've got a lapel mic, so I can just walk through the house now. Okay, I found my white one. It was in my photo box, so I just pulled it out. I think a black one for the colors we're using may have been a better choice. However, white is what we're gonna get. We will start with the base. So, we've got the base here. We've got our highlights and everything, our shells, they're looking pretty good. And then we got our face, her head, which came out fantastic. The back. I mean, she's supposed to. All right. Gonna go ahead and kill the phone camera for now. After today, most of the technical difficulties will be done with this. I will endeavor to have a much more set up spot. I'll see if I can't make a spot where I can move to close-ups easier. And I think for right now, for the process, I don't exactly have a better way to film, but for better pictures of the progress, I'll set up an area. That way we can just swap to that area. We won't be having camera for this part because I am going to do cleanup. One of the things that I do once I have a long painting session like this is I have brush soap, and I think this is the key to keeping your brushes alive longer. Is whenever you have a really long session, you should always use brush soap to wash out your brushes. But I think for starting this, it came out great. I think the base looks fantastic. I will probably do a little more touch-up on her head. Maybe. I'm actually pretty happy with it. So we may leave it at that. One of the benefits to cleaning your brushes like this is you get all of the paint out of the bottom knot of your brush. I think it's called a furl, I could be wrong. But moreover, most paintbrush washers, and I use B&J's The Master brush cleaner, is it also acts as a preserver. So once you're done with it, you put another thin coat on it and you bring your brush to a point, and then it holds that point, and next time you go to paint and you do your initial rinse to get water into your brush, you're going to maintain that point and the brush is going to maintain that shape. And that is one of the things that kills brushes fastest, is having paint in the furrow in the bottom knot, so your brushes go out of whack, all your bristles go out of whack, and B, letting it fray to the point to where you can't get it to a sharp point anymore. I think that's also one of the benefits of using sable brushes, is because they're a natural fiber, they do hold conditioner a little better than a synthetic brush, which doesn't really do a whole lot with the conditioner because it's synthetic. I'm going to try to do painting streams at least once a week. However, any day that I can play games with Brandywines is a day where that's going to happen instead. Just because I get more enjoyment out of that than I do painting. Which should say a lot, because I get a lot of joy out of painting. I think this wet palette is done. I don't need to save any of these paints. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. Even if it's just some paper towels on a plate with a piece of wax paper over it or parchment paper over it, I do think that if you can use a wet palette, you should. It makes blending your colors together so much easier because you can do it right there on the palette. And if you do it in a line where you start a color on one side and a color on another and meet them in the middle, depending on if you pull right or pull left, you can decide just how dark or what the color change between those two is in the blend, and then you always have the color that goes next to it. All right. It was a bit of a chill stream today. I hope everybody had fun. I'm going to go ahead and end stream here. I will be back Monday at 9:30. If it's by myself, I don't know. We may do more Woo-Wah Story or run some maps in Path of Exile. But if it's with Brandywines, it'll be more Nightingale. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And I will see you next week.